In the previous section, we had looked at configuring and administering the vSphere 6.5 networking enhancements. In this section, we will look at configuring and administering the vSphere 6.5 resource management capabilities. In this section, we will take a look at the key enhancements in the vSphere 6.5 resource management area. And once we are done with that, we will go through a brief lab to make you familiar with some of these new capabilities. In this video, we will look at configuring and administering the vSphere 6.5 resource management capabilities that are new, and we will look at the essential capabilities in this area. These capabilities are in three different areas. One is the host lifecycle management capabilities. Then we have the resource management capabilities in the HA, fault tolerance, and the distributed resource scheduler areas. All these are really important for a modern data center. And last but not least, there have been some really excellent enhancements in the developer and automation interfaces as well. So first, we will take a look at the host lifecycle management capabilities, which are in three areas. One is around the VMware Update Manager, the host profiles, and auto deploy. For those of you that have implemented large data centers using vSphere, these three capabilities will make your job even easier, because most of the capabilities that were independent of the vCenter are now integrated into the vCenter server appliance, the VCSA. So for example, the VMware Update Manager is now enabled by default, the VUM, the VUM, and of course, there was no reason why it could not be done before, but it also has now native HA failover support that's possible. In host profiles, there have been some enhancements made that are very useful in terms of usability. The graphical editor in the web client, the CSV file supports. So when you have to set a number of host parameters, by using a CSV file just makes life that much more simple. And there are more informative compliance checks, and we'll talk a little bit more about these. In the auto deploy area, the scalability has been improved. And then because all new modern server hardware and others as well now use UEFI BIOS capabilities, and so the hardware support is available for that as well. There's a new feature which is called script bundle that allows you to run arbitrary scripts after auto deploy, and of course it has the same native HA failover support as the VMware Update Manager. In the area of compliance checks, actually the host profiles has been improved tremendously, because now you can obtain a very detailed side-by-side comparison of values from a profile versus the actual values of a host. And of course, the process of configuring changes is also enhanced in vSphere 6.5 because it is now integrated with DRS. And so where you require maintenance mode and speedy parallel remediation for changes which do not require maintenance mode, it is all possible because of that. And a few other things as well, that it is the whole host profiles can now be created in a hierarchy, and so it just allows a much more organized manner of creating and managing host profiles than a very linear method that we had before. And of course there are some very easy to use search functions available in host profiles as well, so that would come in handy too. In auto deploy, which is the boot from network deployment option, there is a full-featured graphical interface that's available in vSphere 6.5, and we don't have to use Power CLI anymore to manage and deploy rules or custom ESXi images. Unassigned hosts, new hosts which can boot from auto deploy will be collected under the Discovered Hosts tab, and then there is an interactive workflow that enables the provisioning without actually ever having to create a deploy rule as we used to do in the past. In the resource management area around high availability, fault tolerance, and DRS, there have been a whole host of improvements that have been made. And there's a long list up here, but you can see that they're all really important, and I will briefly deal with each and every one of them. So first of all, we start with proactive high availability. So proactive HA works by monitoring the actual hardware. And so there are many vendors for which vCenter has support now. And so vCenter receives the health status of these components, such as the fans, memory, and power supplies, and so on. And working with this, it actually decides if something is labeled unhealthy by the hardware monitoring system. vSphere will then classify the host as either being severely degraded or moderately degraded. And then depending on what component has failed, it will then place this host into a new state, which is called the quarantine mode. When quarantine mode happens, DRS will not use this host for placing new VMs, and it'll keep on attempting to evacuate that host as long as there is no performance issue. And of course, proactive HA can be used to configured to place degraded hosts into maintenance mode as well, in which case the standard process of moving virtual machines off a host would actually happen. So the big advantage of proactive HA is obviously that VMs can be evacuated from a host when it starts getting moderately degraded before there is a complete host failure. The next item is the vSphere high availability orchestrated restart. So there are some major improvements here dealing with multi-tier applications. So there are two additional restart priority levels, which are named highest and lowest, that have been added. So that provides even more control when you plan the recovery of virtual machines. But the main one is that it allows us now to create dependency chains, so that when you have multi-tier applications which need to be started in a particular order, you can put these dependency rules in place so that you never are in a situation where a database server is started in wrong sequence. We next look at simplified admission control. So as we know that admission control is really the process by which we manage to keep spare resources available in a vSphere cluster, so that in the event of a host failure, we can evacuate machines, we can start up virtual machines in the new hosts or the unused hosts that are left as a spare. So obviously we need to set aside some capacity. And then the big change here is that now in vSphere 6.5, you just need to define the number of host failures to tolerate. And once you do this, all the other calculations are actually taken care of. Basically, it applies a percentage of cluster resources admission control policy. And then the nice thing is that as hosts are added or removed from a cluster, this percentage will be automatically recalculated, and this is the default configuration, although it is possible to override it. And then of course there's a new aspect here as well, that the vSphere web client issues a warning if vSphere high availability detects that a host failure would call a reduction in VM performance based on actual resource consumption, not just based on the configured reservation, which was the case before. Let's now look at fault tolerance. In fault tolerance, as is available in vSphere 6.5, it is much more integrated with DRS, which allows better placement decisions to be made, because it is also based on the available network bandwidth and the data store on which to place those secondary VMDK files. And of course, with the new FT that came out with vSphere 6.0, there was additional network latency because of the new process, and new capabilities had to be actually put in place. So now FT networks can be configured to use multiple NICs so that the overall bandwidth is available for FT logging, which was really important, which is very similar now obviously to the multi-NIC vMotion that is also available at this point. Let's look at some of the DRS advanced options in the area of virtual machine distribution. There's a memory metric for load balancing, and there's some aspects around CPU overcommitment that we need to look at. So basically some of the advanced options have been moved to the UI and have a checkbox now. So VM distribution basically means that the cluster or the DRS basically tries to enforce an even distribution of VMs, which is spread the number of VMs evenly across the hosts. And of course, if that causes severe performance imbalance, then it does balance according to performance requirements, and at the expense of basically the numbers of VMs will not be evenly distributed. There's another memory metric for load balancing, and normally DRS uses active memory plus 25% as a primary metric when calculating memory load. And so the consumed memory versus active memory will cause the DRS to use the consumed memory rather than the active memory. And so, the hosts will be basically much more balanced. This one is a little bit tricky. I would not worry too much about it unless in very advanced cases. And then now there's an option to enforce a maximum of a virtual CPU to a physical CPU ratio in the cluster. And once the cluster reaches the defined value, no additional VMs can be allowed to power on. Another esoteric advanced option. We now quickly move to the network aware DRS, which is extremely important. So DRS also now looks at network utilization in addition to the other metrics that it uses when making migration recommendations. What it does is it looks at the transmission and receive rates of the physical links, and then takes a look at the hosts and does not put VMs on those hosts that are greater than 80% utilized. And then it will also balance the hosts based on the network utilization, and it will use the network utilization as a check, and it is not just based on the network utilization. And so it will improve the DRS placement decisions. We then look at storage I/O control and the storage-based policy management framework. So storage I/O control configuration is now performed using storage policies, and the I/O limits are enforced using vSphere APIs for I/O filtering, VAIO, and different administrators can define different policies. So policy-based management of storage is being really pushed really far, and this is obviously very good for vSphere administrators because policy-based management makes life a lot easier in a large data center. And last but not least, we need to look at the content library. In the content library, performance and recoverability has been improved as well as scalability. There's also now an option to store and sync content, and it is also part of the vSphere 6.5 backup and restore service, and is part of the vCenter HA feature set also. It has usability improvements. You can now mount ISOs directly from the content library. You can apply guest OS customizations during VM employment, and you can also update existing templates, which is very interesting. In the developer and automation interfaces area is the next area that we are going to look at, and you will see some super enhancements there also. So in the developer and automation interfaces area, the vSphere REST API has been extended, so it now includes the vCenter server appliance. It also supports VM-based changes and configuration, and there's a new capability called API Explorer which has been introduced that allows you to explore the REST API and to try out new things. This is a really excellent capability. Other vendors like Cisco have done this also, and I'm very happy to see VMware do that here as well. So having covered the enhancements around resource management that are available in vSphere 6.5, and there are plenty, especially in the DRS, fault tolerance, and the high availability areas, as well as key capabilities such as auto deploy and the update manager and host profiles, which are really important in managing a very large scale vSphere data center.